Well, I knew it was coming, but I could never have imagined how wrong I've been dealing with it. So long story short, late the other night, I'm watching the news, right? You with me on this? And just as they do in the news, they give you some heads up. So it's like 35 days to Easter, it was 22 days to spring, and it was at that point 16 days to daylight savings time where you have to spring your clock forward. So we had at this moment, well, that's nice to know, 16-day head-up notice, yes? Very exciting, right? That is compelling news, yes? But I could have never imagined the story that would follow. The gist of the story is this. So at daylight savings time in spring, you literally have to give up, sacrifice an hour, yes? And they went on to reflect on how traumatic that is. And so what you should be doing, young and old alike, is you should be adjusting your sleep schedule now, 5 minutes a day, so basically you will never miss what you are giving up. I can't make this up. And you're sitting there thinking to yourself, wow, like me, I've really screwed up daylight savings time all my life, and for those of you who are parents, you're terrible parents that you have not been doing the weaning thing for weeks already, right? You're thinking that, aren't you? Or you're sitting there thinking like, wow, we really have become soft. Or what we should all really be thinking about is how different our understanding, even just of sacrifice, of giving up an hour of sleep, how different that is from Abraham in our first reading today. Abraham, the powerful story about Abraham, is a whole story, is a powerful message about sacrifice. And it teaches us, among other things, at least 3 really important thoughts. The first is this, that sacrifice, especially in our life of faith, is real. And it needs to be a choice. So unlike that daylight savings time where you're supposed to kind of wean and water it down so you never really miss it, Abraham teaches us that first and foremost, sacrifice, it needs to be a choice that we make for the Lord. Secondly, every act of godly sacrifice is actually a deep expression of trust. Trust in a very, very good and gracious God. To that second reading from Paul to the Romans. If God is for us, who can be? So anytime we make a sacrifice, a godly sacrifice, we are trusting, expressing a deep trust in a good and gracious God. And thirdly, anytime we make a sacrifice, a godly sacrifice, a sacrifice for the Lord, God will always find a way to honor, bless that sacrifice, that offering that we make. So how different from this daylight savings time where we're trying to diminish sacrifice, giving things up at all. Abraham teaches us sacrifice needs to be a choice that we make for the Lord, as an expression of a deep, profound trust in a good and gracious God. And God will always find a way to bless, honor, bring glory to the offering, to the sacrifice that we make. That really then connects us even to the gospel, right? There is the model of Jesus Christ. There is the pattern of our living. That Jesus embraced the sacrifice of the cross. And God the Father found a way to honor and bless that, both for Jesus and especially for all of us. And think about that Lent song. Only this I want, a choice, but to know the Lord so that we can trust more, so that we can bear his cross, sacrifice, so that we can wear the crown he wore, the blessing, the glory. Look at the words, it's on your sheet, very top. It's our prayer. It is the pattern. It is actually the summary of our scriptures today. Only this I want, choice. But to know the Lord, trust. So to bear his cross, sacrifice. So that we can wear the crown he wore, blessing and glory. As we walk into the second week of Lent then, 3 very practical things. The first is this. In our time, in our culture, and again, if you can interpret this news story any way you want, right? We don't talk a lot about sacrifice. Write that word down. It is truly a part of the spiritual life. It is the pattern of our living. Write it down just someplace that you can see it. So this week you can reflect on the spiritual virtue of sacrifice, which is an expression of deep trust in a good and gracious God. Secondly, so in the world, in our times, especially for our kids and grandkids, we may talk about sacrifice in terms of sports or dance or something like that. Yes? Yes? We almost never talk about sacrifice for God. Use this week to stir up a conversation. Sacrifice is going to be, especially godly sacrifice, is going to be part of our lives. Yes? Yes? Talk about it this week. Either from your own experience or just as a reflection. Talk about the sacrifices that you've made for God over the course of your life. Share those stories with children and grandchildren, because sacrifice is not going to go away. And in fact, even more, we need to talk about it as a good, healthy, honestly, a very holy thing. And thirdly, in all those Lent kits, there's that Lent rice bowl. Whatever you choose to put in it is another issue, but put it someplace on your table so that you can see it. Why? Because it will remind you throughout the rest of the season of Lent of sacrifice that you and I are called to make all the time. Sacrifice is a choice we make for the Lord. Sacrifice, godly sacrifice, is an expression of a deep trust in a good and gracious God. And that very good and gracious God will always find a way to honor and bless the sacrifice, the offering that we make. Only this I want, choice, but to know the Lord so that I can trust more. And to bear his cross, sacrifice, so that we can wear the crown he wore, blessing and glory forever.